In my last video I discussed a couple of deceptions being used by the regressive religious right in the marriage equality discussion. Especially obnoxious are the attempts to whip up anxiety about children. This time we'll look at a particularly pernicious form of this deceit: appeals to science. My initial intention for this video was as a response to a blog post by the American activist Katie Faust. Back in April 2015, her blog was called Ask the Bigot, and she posted an entry under the title, "Study the Studies: What the Data Really Tells Us About Same-Sex Parenting." While researching this video, I found that even before the Faust post, the Australian Marriage Forum committed pretty much an identical deception on their website. The cornerstone of these posts is a US Supreme Court AMICUS brief filed during the same-sex marriage proceedings in 2015 by the American College of Pediatricians, or ACPEDS. And this is why I said in my intro that this form of deceit is particularly pernicious, because it takes only a couple of minutes to copy and paste a chunk of text from a seemingly reputable source, but it takes hours and hours of fact-checking to discover that the whole thing is horseshit. One of the things Faust deliberately failed to acknowledge in her blog post is that another, more substantial and more representative amicus brief was also filed in the same Supreme Court case. At least Australian Marriage Forum had the decency to imply that there were others when they wrote, "Many expert submissions have been lodged and we highlight one as a valuable summary." However, in just those few words is another massive deception, because it explicitly suggests that what they are citing is a valuable summary of the many expert submissions. As we shall see, it most definitely is not. But for now, let's stick with the ACPED's amicus brief. Both blog posts quote the summary, which claims that, out of the several dozen studies in the area of same-sex parenting, only 4 should be considered scientifically valid. 1 by Allen, 1 by Regnerus, and 2 by Sullins. Now, when we look at the amicus brief document itself, there's a link in the description below, we find that 2 of the signatories to that brief are, in fact, the authors of 3 of those 4 studies. Now, there's nothing wrong with citing your own work, but it does raise a little red flag when, of the dozens of studies available, these guys could find only one, other than their own, that they would consider to be scientifically valid, and it just so happens to agree with their conclusions. But don't panic, it's only a little red flag. I'll just pop it here. Let's have a look at these 4 studies and their authors. Dr. Douglas Allen is a Canadian economist who analysed data from the 2006 census for his paper, High School Graduation Rates Among Children of Same-Sex Households, and found that children living in same-sex families were 65% as likely to graduate compared with children living with opposite-sex families. Allen's findings have been widely refuted, not least because he failed to control for family stability. This is critical because, according to the overwhelming majority of researchers, it is family stability and socio-economic circumstances that are the most important determinants of child outcomes, not the gender nor number of parents in the home. Red flag. Douglas Allen is a Christian who, during the DeBoer versus Snyder case, insisted that he was not biased, shortly before admitting that he believed unrepentant homosexuals would go to hell. Further evidence of his lack of bias can be found in his association with the Ruth Institute as one of their circle of experts. The Ruth Institute is an ultra-conservative Catholic group opposed to same-sex marriage, single parents, donor conception, and other evils of the sexual revolution, despite the fact that their logo appears to be emblematic of polygamy. Sorry, Dr. Douglas Allen, another little red flag. Dr. Mark Regnerus is a sociologist at the University of Texas at Austin. His study, How Different Are Adult Children of Parents Who Have Same-Sex Relationships? Findings from the New Family Structures Study, is one of the favourites of opponents of same-sex marriage and is probably the most infamous of all studies of same-sex parenting. Among the many concerns is the fact that the study was funded by the conservative Witherspoon Institute, who openly oppose same-sex marriage, but there are 2 other key concerns. One involves research methodology, and I'll leave a link in the description to a video by Professor John Corvino from Wayne State University, Michigan, which outlines just a few of the issues. Red flag. The other concern is how the study came to be published in the journal Social Science Research in the first place. A letter to the editors of Social Science Research, signed by 200 sociologists, psychologists and other scholars, stated, "We are very concerned about the academic integrity of the peer review process for this paper as well as its intellectual merit. We question the decision of Social Science Research to publish the paper, and particularly to publish it without an extensive, rigorous peer review process and commentary from scholars with explicit expertise in LGBT family research." This led the journal's editor to instigate an audit of the peer review process, which Darren Shurkat subsequently published under the humorous and telling title, Editorial Process and Politicised Scholarship, Monday Morning Editorial Quarterbacking and a Call for Scientific Vigilance. In the opening statement, we get our first red flag. The timeline of Regnerus's data collection effort and paper submission is highly unusual. Regnerus wrote and submitted the first draft of the paper before the data collection had been completed. Somehow, Regnerus knew what the outcome of the study would be even before he had finished collecting data? Red flag. And another red flag on the next page. The reviewers are not without some connection to Regnerus. Two admitted to being paid consultants on the Regnerus study. Conflict of interest, anyone? Red flag. And again on the next page. It is notable that the day after publication of the Regnerus study, it was cited in an amicus curiae brief by a conservative Christian political organisation to justify denying marriage rights to same-sex couples. Another red flag. The conservative Christian political organisation Shurkat is speaking of is the American College of Paediatricians, but more on them in a moment. It is also worth noting that Shurkat also singled out Lauren D. Marks, a name that will come up again shortly. Marks is another researcher whose paper would not have been published if the peer review process was not faulty. Shurkat described the Marks study as a lowbrow meta-analysis and as inappropriate for a journal that publishes original quantitative research. In an interview the following year, Shurkat was scathing of Regnerus, concluding, "I completely dismissed the study. It's over. He has been disgraced. All of the prominent people in the field know what he did and why he did it." Why do you do it? Because Regnerus is a conservative Catholic. He went to seminary before becoming a sociologist and believes, in his own words, "As Christians, our lives should reflect our relationship with God and our desire to glorify Him. I believe that if your faith matters, it should inform what you teach and what you research." Red flag. But perhaps the most prominent red flag of all is that his own university rejects his findings. Dr. Regnerus's opinions are his own. They do not reflect the views of the university. And the sociology department goes even further. Dr. Regnerus's opinions are his own. They do not reflect the views of the sociology department of the University of Texas at Austin, nor do they reflect the views of the American Sociological Association, which takes the position that the conclusions he draws from his study of gay parenting are fundamentally flawed on conceptual and methodological grounds. Wow, that's a lot of red flags. Our final researcher is a Catholic priest. Not just a Catholic, a priest. Now, at the risk of being accused of an ad hominem attack, I've just got to say, when your career, not just your beliefs, but your entire career, is based on believing something for which you have insufficient evidence, your capacity for objective, evidence-based research is called greatly into question, especially when the area of research is so inextricably linked to your religious ideology. Now, I'm not claiming here that Solons is not capable of good science. I'm just saying, red flag. Here are the two studies in question. Child Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder in Same-Sex Parent Families in the United States, Prevalence and Comorbidities, and Emotional Problems Among Children with Same-Sex Parents, Difference by Definition. Solons's two studies have been caned by other scholars for a number of reasons, including the previously discussed failure to adequately distinguish between the influence of same-sex parenting and the influence of other factors like family stability. Red flag. Another concern raised is that both the Sullins studies were not published in well-respected professional journals. They were published in pay-for-publication online journals with poor quality peer review processes. Both of these journals are published by the highly questionable Science Domain International. This is what the APA has to say. None of the journals in which Sullins' papers were published are indexed in major, reputable social science databases. The peer review process used by these journals appears to have been perfunctory and conducted by reviewers without relevant expertise or any familiarity with the NHIS. One critic of Sullins, Professor Philip Cohen of the University of Maryland, is more blunt in his assessment. What makes these scam journals? The first clue is that two of them have British in the name, despite not being British in any way. They are all published by Science Domain, which is listed on Bureau's list of potential, possible or probable predatory scholarly open access publishers. They are not published by academic societies. They are not indexed by major academic journal databases. They publish thousands of papers with little or no peer review, at the expense of the authors, and they recruit authors, editors and reviewers through worldwide spam campaigns that sweep up shady pseudo-scholars. Strong stuff. I'll leave a link in the description below and you can see what he had to say about Sullins himself. Sullins is another darling of the regressive religious right. Faust and Australian Marriage Forum and all the rest still cite him to this day, despite the fact that his research is unequivocally dismissed by the overwhelming majority of scholars in this area. Okay, now, what are we to make of all this? So far we have seen some scientists make some claims, and we have seen some other scientists making some counterclaims. How do we work out what is really correct? Well, we could read these 4 papers, and then read the other dozens of papers in this area, and decide for ourselves which position is most likely to be valid. 2 problems. First, that would take each of us hundreds of hours. Second, and more importantly, the vast majority of us are totally unqualified to judge scientific literature. Our understanding of experimental design, data collection, and statistical analysis, let alone all the cognitive biases we are subject to and need to be wary of, is just too remedial for us to reach a meaningful conclusion. But we don't have to do all that because of a little thing called scientific consensus. Scientific consensus represents our best current understanding of the way the world is. Scientific consensus is reached when the overwhelming majority of scholars in a particular field of study agree on what is true, and any disagreement is insubstantial or insignificant. Scientific consensus does not require unanimous agreement. Unanimity is rare in science, not least because, well, humans. Humans are flawed. They make mistakes. They are not invariably rational. They are, often unknowingly, influenced by beliefs and biases. And unfortunately, there are also those who are driven by something other than a desire for the truth. Scientific consensus is our great safeguard against these human failings. It is what gets us closer and closer to truth, and further from error. So, what is the consensus on outcomes for children raised in same-sex households? Let's compare the ACPED's AMICUS brief with that other AMICUS brief I alluded to earlier. Here are the signatories of the AMICUS brief cited by Faust and Australian Marriage Forum. We've already met Sullins and Regnerus, and there's that other name we saw earlier, Lauren D. Marks. Marks was educated at Brigham Young University. That's right, Marks is a practicing Mormon. Now again, I'm not suggesting that Christians cannot do good science. However, it does raise a little red flag when everybody we have seen so far who opposes same-sex marriage is a conservative Christian. Just saying. But what did Marks conclude from his own research? In his paper, Same-Sex Parenting and Children's Outcomes, a closer examination of the American Psychological Association's brief on lesbian and gay parenting, Marks asks the question, are we witnessing the emergence of a new family form that, unlike cohabiting divorced or single-parent families, provides a context for children that is equivalent to the intact family? And concludes, even after an extensive reading of the same-sex parenting literature, the author cannot offer a high-confidence, data-based yes or no response to this question. Now hold on a second. Why then is Marks a signatory to an anti-same-sex marriage amicus brief? It clearly has nothing to do with his science. Here he is, using his scientific credentials to lend credence to an ideological position which is not even supported by his own research. Red flag, Marx. Red flag. Family Watch International is, surprise, surprise, a conservative right-wing organisation founded in 1999 which claims supporters in 170 countries. However, I could find no data regarding the group's actual membership. The organisation is headed by another Mormon, Sharon Slater. Slater is a particularly virulent example of the conservative pestilence. She has no problem at all in just making stuff up. For example, she asserts that Planned Parenthood, the non-profit dedicated to reproductive health care and education, has a plot to sexualise children because, and I quote, "If they can sexualise children through the school system through their programs, they can provide them with sexual counselling, condoms, abortions, contraception, STD treatment, HIV treatment, etc., etc. They're making lots of money off of sexualising children. So they're getting it into the classroom all across the United States and countries all around the world. Holy shit snacks. Seriously, red frigging flag." But surely the lead signatory is reputable, right? They are called the American College of Pediatricians. That's totally legit, right? Well, I'm afraid not. ACPEDS is a breakaway group of ultra-conservative paediatricians formed in 2002. That's right, just 15 years ago. The name American College of Pediatricians was deliberately chosen to cause confusion between themselves and the legitimate representatives of pediatricians in the US, the American Academy of Pediatrics. The college has created this convenient table to show how they differ from the Academy. Among other regressive views they hold is the preference for abstinence-based sex education, opposition to the morning after pill, and, of course, opposition to same-sex parenting. You can find some pretty odious opinions on their website, such as this little gem from someone called Dr. Veritas. In one sense, it could be argued that the LGBT movement is only tangentially associated with pedophilia. I see that argument, but the pushers of the movement, the activists, I think have pedophilia intrinsically woven into their agenda. And ACPEDs have been accused of misrepresenting research findings to advance their regressive agenda. That is, lying. For example, in 2010, NIH director and former head of the Genome Project, Dr. Francis Collins, wrote, "It is disturbing for me to see special interest groups distort my scientific observations to make a point against homosexuality. The American College of Pediatricians pulled language out of context from a book I wrote in 2006 to support an ideology that can cause unnecessary anguish and encourage prejudice. The information they present is misleading and incorrect." Like Family Watch International, ACPEDS does not publish data regarding its membership. Current estimates have it as somewhere between 200 and 500. Okay, so for the first AMICUS brief, we've got 3 individuals, a representative organisation of maybe, perhaps, up to 500 individuals, and another organisation which is not representative. Let's err on the side of generosity and say that this AMICUS brief represents 1,000 people. Now, let's have a look at that other AMICUS brief. You know, the one the Deceivers conveniently forgot to mention in their blog posts. One of the signatories is the aforementioned American Academy of Pediatrics. This organisation was founded in 1930 and, at the time the AMICUS brief was filed, represented a membership in excess of 60,000. Unlike ACPEDS, the AAP runs continuing medical education and the largest paediatric publishing program in the world. In short, it is the representative body for paediatricians in the United States. ACPEDS was actually formed as a splinter group after the AAP published a policy statement supporting gay couples adopting children. And a very small splinter it is. A few hundred members compared with over 60,000. This means, consensus-wise, compared with the AAP, ACPEDS is outnumbered by somewhere between 120 and 300 to 1. This is what 120 to 1 looks like. But it doesn't end there. Here are some of the other signatories to the AAP AMICUS brief. American Psychological Association, American Psychiatric Association, the National Association of Social Workers, the American Medical Association, American Psychoanalytic Association, American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, American Academy of Family Physicians. All of these organisations are the peak representative bodies in their fields in the US. All of these organisations explicitly reject the assertions of ACPEDS and its co-signatories. Now, is it even remotely possible that all of these peak organisations, representing thousands upon thousands of professionals, have somehow got the science wrong, and the truth actually lies with a tiny, tiny minority of fringe dwellers? Well, the US Supreme Court didn't think so, because in June 2015, they found in favour of marriage equality. That's over 2 years ago, Australia. Should we perhaps forgive Faust her oversight in not also linking to an opposing amicus brief? Should we give her the benefit of the doubt, since her blog post was published 2 months before the Supreme Court decision? Could it be that she was just mistaken, and not, in fact, deliberately deceitful? Well, I'm afraid not. This year, Faust closed her Ask a Bigot blog and started a new one, Them Before Us, complete with a revised version of Study the Studies, which just rehashes the same bloody bullshit. Only this time she has been a bit savvier. This time she has included links to legitimate research such as the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent to Adult Health, also known as AdHealth, alongside the links to the bogus research by, for example, Sullins again. So now, anyone who clicks on the links, and Faust knows that the overwhelming majority will not click the links and will instead simply take her words as gospel, but those who do click will be presented with a mixture of genuine science and junk science, the former deliberately chosen to give the latter the appearance of legitimacy. Faust's new website is much slicker than the previous one, and I have no doubt at all that many will be taken in by its professional look. And as if her written deceptions weren't enough, take a look at the odious graphics which accompany the lies. Here we see a loving traditional family. See how the child is receiving the affections of both his male and female parent? What a lovely family. And here we see the dysfunctional fag family. See how the poor child must compete with an adult for the affections of his father? Oh, woe and buggeration. But back to the so-called science, and back to Australia. Could it be that Australian Marriage Forum were mistaken back in 2015 and have come to see the light? Again, I'm afraid not. Australian Marriage Forum is headed by a Toowoomba GP, Dr. David Van Gend. You can hear him in an interview with Lyle Shelton from September this year, complaining about how the AMA policy statement from May is dishonest. And yet, in the very same interview he says, the publisher of the Sullins study achieved the absolute highest grade of peer-reviewed rigour. Now that is demonstrably false. Either Van Gend is making shit up, or he is deliberately lying. Van Gend is one of the 6 instigators of the Critique AMA campaign, which claims that the AMA were dishonest when they wrote in their policy statement, "There is no putative peer-reviewed evidence to suggest that children raised in same-sex parented families suffer poorer health or psychosocial outcomes as a direct result of the sexual orientation of their parents or carers." And what evidence did Van Gend and his cronies bring forth in support of their accusation? You got it. Sullins, Regnerus and Allen. Sorry, Deceivers. Sullins, Regnerus and Allen do not count as peer-reviewed evidence. These papers are junk science. They have been discredited, debunked and destroyed. And other Australians involved in this discussion are also perpetrating the same deceptions, using the same half dozen or so junk studies. Here we have the Catholic Women's League boldly stating, children from married heterosexual two-parent households do better academically, financially, emotionally and behaviourally than children raised in other forms of relationships. And citing ACPEDS, Regnerus and Marx. Here we have a slick YouTube channel, Big Deal, who, when challenged on the assertions they make in one of their videos, responded, "No, we are not parroting what we have heard. We have undertaken considerable effort to review and collate a body of evidence at blah 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 website." Have a guess which research made it onto their not at all biased website? Well, Sullins, Regnerus, Allen and Marx How surprising! Not a reputable source in sight. But perhaps even worse, we have mainstream commentators in major publications taking part in the same deception. On September 3, in the Herald Sun, Andrew Bolt laments, "Truth, the first casualty of same-sex marriage bullies." But here he is on August 16, responding to this statement made by another reporter. The overwhelming body of scientific research suggests children raised by same-sex couples do at least as well as those raised in heterosexual families. With his own counterclaim, this claim is false. It is not only inherently implausible, but demonstrably untrue. Then he touts the same bullshit studies, Sullins, Regnerus and Allen, as though they are legitimate science. Then he has the gall to sign off with, "After all, this is not about truth, but about seeming." Bolt is good at this kind of hypocrisy. Back to the September 3 article, Bolt concludes, "It seems the commitment of many journalists to same-sex marriage is so fierce they cannot see or report evidence that doesn't suit their agenda. The irony is so thick it's going rusty." There seems no end in sight. The deceivers will continue to deceive, knowing that the overwhelming majority of people will not fact-check their bullshit. It is a problem as old as humanity. Is it cynical of me to notice that the majority of these deceivers also claim to be followers of Jesus Christ? Now, you have every right to oppose same-sex marriage if you feel you have a good reason to. But if you have to rely on lies and deceptions to support your position, then you've already lost the debate. Always strive to act with integrity, and please, use your brain.